It's December 1942. A parachute opens over a dark English field. The man beneath it has just jumped from a German Luftwaffe aircraft. He has a radio set, a forged identity card, a cover story, and a mission from Nazi intelligence to sabotage a British aircraft factory. He lands. He buries the parachute. And then he walks to the nearest police station and knocks on the door. "I have some things," he tells the constable, "that I think your superiors are going to want to hear." This is the story of Eddie Chapman, safecracker, con man, convicted criminal, and the most improbable double agent in the history of British intelligence. They called him Agent Zigzag, for very good reason. Edward Arnold Chapman was born in 1914 in Burnopfield, a coal mining village in County Durham. His father worked the pits. The family had little. Chapman did not take well to limits. By his early 20s he had drifted from the army. He joined and deserted twice, into the company of London's criminal underground. He was charming, good-looking, quick with a joke and quicker with a plan. He fell in with a gang of safecrackers who specialized in what they called jelly work. Nitroglycerin-based gelignite applied to safe doors, a technique that required precision and nerve. Chapman had both. He was good at the work. He was also terrible at staying out of trouble. He was arrested several times throughout the late 1930s, for safecracking, for fraud, for running from the police. He did short stretches in prison, was bailed out by friends and girlfriends, and went straight back to what he knew. There was a restlessness to him, a need for danger that ordinary civilian life simply couldn't satisfy. By 1939, he was hiding out in Jersey, the Channel Island just off the French coast, with a warrant outstanding in England. When Germany occupied Jersey in June 1940, Chapman did what any sensible fugitive would do. He sat very still and hoped no one noticed him. For a while, that worked. Then he got arrested again, this time by the German military authorities, for a separate burglary. He sat in a Jersey prison, thinking about his options, which were not many. And that is when the Abwehr came to see him. The Abwehr was German military intelligence, not the SS, not the Gestapo, but the professional spy service of the Wehrmacht. They had a problem. They needed agents inside Britain. They could see in Eddie Chapman something worth trying. He was British. He was criminal, which meant both useful and controllable. He spoke the language, knew the country, had contacts. They offered him a deal, work for Germany and walk out of prison. Chapman said yes. What they didn't know, couldn't know because he didn't fully know it himself yet, was which direction he'd actually run when they let him go. The Germans were thorough. They transported Chapman to a villa near Nantes in occupied France, which served as an Abwehr training facility. He spent months there, learning everything they had to teach him: wireless telegraphy, Morse code, silent killing, explosives, dead drops, codes and ciphers, cover story construction. His German handlers liked him. He was a quick study, funny, sociable. They called him Fritz, a nickname, a term of affection from people who thought they'd recruited a genuine asset. He also had a talent for observation. He noticed things. He filed them away. He watched the German officers at the school, noted their habits and weaknesses, memorized faces and names. Later, MI5 would marvel at the quality of the intelligence he carried back in his head. Not just about his mission, but about the entire Abwehr network he'd moved through. His mission, as they briefed him in late 1942, was straightforward: parachute into England, make his way to the de Havilland aircraft factory at Hatfield, and sabotage the electrical transformer room. De Havilland manufactured the Mosquito, one of Britain's most effective light bombers. Disrupting production, even briefly, would be a meaningful blow. The Germans gave him money, equipment, and a cover identity as Morgan O'Brien, a Welsh merchant seaman. They were proud of what they'd built. One of Chapman's handlers told him, somewhat emotionally, that he was their best agent and they expected great things. Chapman thanked him and waited for the right night to jump. He had already decided what he was going to do. The question wasn't whether to turn himself in to the British. The question was only how quickly he could do it without getting shot in the dark by a Home Guard patrol. MI5 debriefed Chapman over several weeks at a succession of safe houses in England. He told them everything, not just his mission, but the faces, the names, the codes, the radio schedules, the Abwehr station in Nantes, the layout of the villa. It was an intelligence windfall. The man who walked in from the cold, as it were, happened to have a photographic memory and no particular loyalty to the people who'd sent him. What happened next was a collaboration between Chapman and a group of MI5 case officers who were, by all accounts, both delighted and slightly alarmed by what they had on their hands. He was enthusiastic. He was creative. He generated ideas faster than they could evaluate them. He was also an ex-con who had spent his adult life running cons, and this, they quickly recognized, was exactly the kind of person you needed for what they were about to do. The plan? Stage the sabotage. On January 29, 1943, the de Havilland factory at Hatfield was destroyed. A team of MI5 engineers and the distinguished camouflage expert Jasper Maskelyne, nephew of a famous magician, constructed a convincing wreckage in the transformer yard. Papier-mâché cooling towers, false debris, damage designed to look catastrophic from an aerial reconnaissance photograph. Chapman transmitted a success report to his German handlers via the radio. The Luftwaffe flew reconnaissance missions over Hatfield and photographed the damage. German intelligence reported back to Berlin that the mission had succeeded. Berlin was thrilled. One of the most important aircraft factories in Britain appeared to be out of action. The agent they'd trained had delivered. They awarded Eddie Chapman the Iron Cross. He was, as far as the historical record shows, the only British citizen ever to receive the Iron Cross. MI5 kept the medal. Chapman was quietly amused by the whole thing. But the war wasn't over, and Chapman wanted to go back. In early 1944, with D-Day approaching and the Germans increasingly desperate for intelligence, Chapman was sent back to the continent, this time voluntarily, as part of the Double Cross system, the extraordinary MI5 operation that had turned virtually the entire German spy network in Britain into a collection of controlled double agents. His mission now was to embed himself back into the Abwehr, gather what intelligence he could, and eventually return. Which is what he did for a while. He moved through occupied Europe. He reported to his German handlers. He fed them carefully constructed false information that MI5 had prepared. He was, in the terminology of the double-cross system, still running. At some point, German intelligence seems to have had doubts about Chapman. The suspicions were never fully confirmed during the war, but there are indications in the MI5 files that his German handlers were becoming uncertain of his reliability. The relationship cooled. He was eventually returned to Britain and the operation was wound down. After the liberation of Europe, MI5 assessed what Chapman had contributed. The value was significant. The intelligence he'd brought in from his time at the Abwehr facility, the disruption of German confidence in their networks, the strategic benefit of the Hatfield deception. He'd also provided accurate warnings about V-1 flying bomb sites in France, intelligence that contributed to Allied targeting operations. The British government thanked him, quietly, and then told him, firmly, that he was not to write a book. He agreed. He waited. 20 years later, when the secrecy ban was finally lifted, he wrote the book. He lived to 1997. The official histories tend to be slightly uncomfortable with Eddie Chapman, and the discomfort is understandable. He was a criminal. He worked both sides, at least nominally. His motivations were never purely patriotic. He liked the money, liked the danger, liked the feeling of being at the center of something that mattered. But here is what is also true. He turned himself in when he didn't have to. He could have gone into hiding in England, disappeared, let the Germans think he was running his mission. Instead, he walked into a police station with everything he had. And what he had turned out to be genuinely valuable. Ben McIntyre, who wrote the best account of Chapman's story, describes him as a man who was constitutionally incapable of being ordinary, who needed risk the way other people need routine. The war gave him the grandest stage imaginable, and he performed brilliantly on it, in his own sideways, unpredictable fashion. He received the Iron Cross from Germany and a quiet handshake from Britain. That's a kind of summary of what the war was like for people who lived at its stranger edges. Complicated, unglamorous, and not quite the story anyone had planned. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold front. New stories every week.